Neo-Freudian basically means everyone who came after Freud, right? The new Freudians. Carl Jung was the most famous one, most popular one, the most liked one. Um, and he gave a very different idea to psychoanalysis altogether, right? He gave us largely the main thing is about the personal and collective unconscious. He shared a lot of what Freud believed in terms of the unconscious and all of that, and they used to meet regularly in Vienna, um, in the IPA, International Psychoanalytical Association. And their first, I think, in that association, their first topic was about cigars or something like that. But anyway, right? He didn't agree with the value Freud placed on sexual behavior. So he said that there are other stuff that's important. He said the unconscious is divided into two parts. One is your personal unconscious, which is similar to what Freud spoke about, and then there is a collective unconscious, which is shared by the larger community, and similar events have transmitted from generation to generation, right? He coined the term complex to reflect some personal tension that somebody is going through, right? He referred to a collection of archetypes. Archetypes are certain criteria, certain stereotypes, sort of thing, which everyone has and is born with, and ideas about certain types of people and behavior that are there, right? So you have the mother archetype, who's supposed to be a certain way, or doctor archetype, who's supposed to be a certain way. So it's a form of a stereotype, but that has passed through generations, and a lot of people share it, right? So they inherited and universal. Then he used mandala as a part of his therapy, where the idea of the mandala is to have like a unified self, and there are lots of elements to the unified self. So he used that Buddhist ideology to discuss about how each person's individual individuation process, right, understanding the self, is similar to a mandala where a lot of things need to get combined and sort of a clearer image of the person comes in. Then he said that the self is comprised of the anima and the animus. The anima is the feminine side and the animus is the masculine side. Um, and then he said that everyone's personality also has a dark side, right? Which is referred to as the shadow. And the shadow archetype is more with the dark triad of personality sort of thing. And then he also gave us the concept of persona, which is the facade somebody puts up uh, and shows that they're somebody else when actually they're actually. Uh, then he also gave us the idea of introversion, extroversion. So he was the first person to really discuss that distinction. And he viewed extroversion as energy habitually directed outward, and introversion that's energy directed inward. From this, he developed four other functions, which sort of created the 16 different types of psychological types of personality. So the four functions were thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. Thinking is thinking, feeling is feeling, intuition is having a sort of sense, a gut feeling of things, and sensation is sort of judging what's going on, right? Like an emotional intelligence of sorts. So these four combined with introspection and extroversion created a idea of personality according to Jung, which was then used by the Myers-Briggs type indicator uh, questionnaire and personality type, this INFP and INJP and ENPJP and whatever else, right? Um, so MBTI is used in various settings. It shows validity when it's used with the five-factor model. So they have reliability and validity that is supported. Um, with the concerns with the MBTI is that it has a very categorical approach. So you become an INE, INFJ, or INPJ, or whatever, I don't know, right? And uh, that becomes difficult to sort of, like, someone gets stuck in that category, right? There's no variation. And it doesn't say that if you're INFJ, you can become INFP or so on and so forth, right? That movement is sort of restricted. And because it uses these very technical terms, it's very difficult to translate it into other local languages. Um, the criticism for Freud's theory again is similar to the criticisms for Jung's theory, similar to what was for Freud, that is, there's no empirical testing. The idea of archetypes as inherited spiritual influences for all of humanity is not really supported, and not everyone is the same mother archetype or the father archetype or whatever. Uh, but he provided a good basis for personality, and he created understanding that personality is not very deterministic and that person can change, and over a lifetime, a lot of events can happen. So it's more socially constructed sort of thing, right? I really like Adler. I don't know why. A lot of people don't talk about him enough, I feel. But he had some very interesting ideas. And people only think of Adler in terms of birth order, which is not fair. So his idea was that each person is unique, right? And therefore his entire school was called the Individual Psychology School, right? Uh, and he like Jung went against, he didn't go against Freud as much as Adler did actually. Jung said that he doesn't agree that sexual impulses affect behavior to the extent that Freud thought it did, right? So he agreed that it did affect, but not to the same extent. Whereas Adler said that no, all this is nonsense, and this deterministic view of what happens in childhood affects you forever and all of that is slightly problematic, and children don't have sexual urges, right? And he believed that people try to overcome a sense of inferiority that arises from some form of biological weakness, which he referred to as organ inferiority, or from a psychological weakness, right, which comes slightly later in life. This actually came from Adler's personal life because he suffered from rickets as a kid, so he always felt a slight amount of weakness in his bodily features, basically. So his struggle was that, and then I think that's where his theory comes from also. Uh, and he says that everyone is just trying all the time to become better, right? And to become successful and superior. So that's a need that everybody has, and that's the drive that everybody has. And then in that process they see the world and they perceive the world, and everyone does it differently, so it's very subjective, and to say that this event has affected these many people in this way is not fair, right? And then he spoke of personality as being this unified self-consistent um, thing that's based on social behavior, right? So all human behavior and activity is based on social interest and social support and social behavior. So uh, the person's personality develops based on this idea, and then eventually that personality becomes their style of life. Okay, so that's a very important concept. He spoke of the style of life, which is the behavior of a person that's consistent with how they want to live their life, basically, right? And it's molded by how people see and visualize their life. So that was the creative power that sort of molded a person's behavior and how they lived. Now, uh, the most common thing that he spoke about that everyone sort of knows is that uh, everyone has an inferiority complex, right? You develop it because of some reason or another, and then you strive to overcome it and gain superiority and perfection, right? And organ inferiority complex are there for most people, but then how your biology and environmental shapes it creates individual differences between the complexes. So, for example, he says that when you're small, you are dependent, right? That naturally just creates an inferiority complex because you're not self-sufficient and you're inferior. And your entire journey towards adulthood is to become sufficient, right? Become uh, competent and have more control of your own life. And in that process, once you reach that point, a lot of stuff happens, so you perceive things differently. But that's the entire thing, right? That you're from your everyone is having an inferiority complex because they're dependent. And then the entire journey of life is to sort of have more control, right? Then the style of life are unique patterns of how people express based on their early life experiences. So meanings that are gravely mistaken result from situations that involve in organ inferiority, pampered children, or neglected children. So people who have like mistaken meanings of life. So one of the examples is suppose the meaning of life for some person is just about making money. So Adler would have said that that's a gravely mistaken meaning to derive about life because it's not allowing the person to see their style of life in as expansive way as possible. And it's a result of some form of inferiority or pampering or neglect that they had as children. So, organ inferiority contributes to humiliation and defensiveness from social comparisons, but the idea is to overcome it, right? So, you will feel humiliated, you will feel slightly defensive about whatever you're not good at, but that is not going to just exist and you can get better. So, pampered children feel more prominent and may react when they no longer feel this way. So, this is one very important factor, like where he says that if your child is pampered, then that inferiority is not self overcome, it's overcome by other people's validation, right? And when that stops at some point, then these people don't know really what to do. So they no longer feel, they feel very entitled and they react badly, basically. Neglected children become too cold and hostile because they don't trust other people, and therefore they don't learn how to get over their inferiority, and the inferiority just stays. So uh, his focus in therapy was to discover prototypes called old remembrances that sort of define their adult style of life. So they'll see their life now, right? How they're living, and then they'll go back and they'll discuss their childhood and all that, and they'll try and find these specific events that sort of created this thing for this person, right? Um, so there were basically four larger styles of life. This, please remember. There was the ruling type, which was a style of life where someone wanted control on everything. Then the getting type, where the style of life is just depending on other people. Then there's avoiding type, which is staying far away and isolated from everybody and just doing your own thing. And socially useful type, which is the best form, is self-controlled person with an interest in developing socially and society in general. Okay. The most famous thing for from Adler's world is that of birth order, where he spoke about how birth order affects personality, and said that only children are pampered and lack social interest. Firstborn children are conservative, obedient, maybe more ambitious. Secondborn children are the best adjusted kids. Youngest ones are again pampered. They may not find meaning in life very easily. Uh, and then you had Ernst and Angst in 1983. They did a large scale study and they found very low association between birth order and personality. But a lot of flaws were found in their research. So later, one of the famous guys, Salovey, sorry, he sort of did another study with a better model and better research ways, and he found that a lot of firstborn children are high achievers and secondborns are rebellious. But the most research in this area is very inconsistent, right? However, beliefs about birth order are still held by most people, and they do think that okay, first ones are like the second ones are like that, third ones are like this. Which, if you link it with Jung, it makes sense because it's a collective unconscious sort of idea. In terms of theory, there was not much contribution, right? But in terms of research and uh, concepts, there was a lot of information, right? So her idea was that more than personal experiences, cultural factors influence personality, and these cultural factors are responsible for individual differences. So she said that throughout life, people will suffer through three contradictions, and they have to sort of decide how they want to be. One is success versus love. So which one is more important to them? Idealism versus frustration, and independence versus situational constraints. Right? These are all self-explanatory terms. Uh, she spoke about basic anxiety and basic hostility. She said that most behavior is based out of the idea of basic anxiety, which is what everyone feels, which is similar to what Adler spoke about inferiority, which is a state of helplessness, a fear of abandonment. So people are just always living on this basic anxiety is there, and then they're just trying to overcome it all the time, and basis of all behavior is this, right? That everyone is fearful of being left alone and abandoned. Therefore, they behave in the ways that they do accordingly, right? So, and then she asserted that children develop hostility. Hostility is self-explanatory again, right? As a result of parental neglect. So, if parents are neglectful, again, that causes problem for the child. Um, she suggests that a basic conflict arises from contradictions and is central to neurosis. So contradictions between this, right? Between these three things. So if these contradictions, they'll create conflict. If not dealt with, then it will lead to some form of neurosis, which is just mental illness, like the umbrella term, basically.